In what ways does your media product use, develop or challenge forms and conventions of real media products? When planning my film, I had a lot of influences in mind, which included other short films, feature-length films, theories and eras. I knew that I wanted my film to be postmodern, which usually seems slightly random and containing a lot of influences. I feel as if my film sticks quite closely to the convention of intertextuality, with my editing references to Scott Pilgrim vs. the World and the similarity of music from the 1980s. However, I challenged the idea of making everything seem random by trying to create a slightly thicker plot that my audience would have to try and understand in order to grasp the ideas that I want to come across when watching the film. Trainspotting and the beach were two other influences of mine, mostly due to the jump shots that I tried to use in my film in order to show the confusion in my character's mind. However, I was also influenced by these films to include a voiceover, as I thought it gave a good insight into what the character was truly feeling. Another convention used from a film was the split screens used throughout Scott Pilgrim vs. the World, as they make the whole thing seem surreal, which I wanted to come across as it makes everything seem relatively more eerie and deceiving as things are not what they seem. The plot of Les Miserables was another influence of mine, yet I decided to challenge the conventions that were used in this text by setting the same kind of events in a more modern way. I wanted to do this to make my film more relatable to my own generation, while still trying to emphasise the problems that are held within society. How effective is the combination of your main product and ancillary texts? The ancillary texts that I created were a film review for a website and a film poster. When creating these pieces, I made sure to relate them closely to the short film itself. This included the themes, the mise-en-scene used, and the general feel of the film. By taking influences from my short film, I felt that it would be an effective combination between the three, and would therefore create an obvious link for the audience. I created my film poster on the software Fireworks, which I'm very comfortable with using. For this, it was important to include our own original photography, and I did this by taking multiple pictures of my characters and one of the British flag. I felt it important to plan the layout and design that I wanted for the poster, and this made the creation process of the actual film poster much more simple than it would have been had I not taken the time to prepare myself. The colours of the British flag are prominent throughout my film, with the titles and the colour of the girl's necklace, and I therefore wanted to keep this theme in my poster. I did this by using my own photograph of the British flag as part of the background, and by also making the writing red, white and blue. The British flag was important to include as it relates to the anarchic theme that runs throughout my film. By using original photography, I was able to capture and edit the photos how I pleased. For example, the picture of my character Ewan was captured in a specific chiaroscuro manner in order to show the darkness that he withholds. As it was not possible to make the definition extremely obvious when contrasting the dark with the light, I had to import it into iPhoto and transform it this way by adjusting the brightness, contrast and temperature of the photograph to achieve a more defined and eerie look. The font was another important aspect to the poster, yet unfortunately the correct font style for my film was hard to come by. This meant that I had to research into downloadable fonts that are on the internet. This brought me to dafont.com, a website that's sole purpose is to allow for the download and upload of their fonts. I decided to choose a style of font that truly portrayed the rebelled nature of my characters, and went with a font that almost looks like graffiti. This once again relates to the anarchic theme in my products. When creating our posters, we were told to include a tagline, and I thought this to be an appropriate place to emphasise the true meaning of the character's nature of rebellion. I went with a well-known quote from the Genevan philosopher Jean-Jacques Rousseau: "Man is born free, but he is everywhere in chains." I thought this to be suitable for the storyline and theme of my film, as it justifies why my characters are acting the way that they are when rebelling against the higher classes. It also relates to my main character Catherine and how she feels, as she's been completely isolated from everyone, hence why she ends up rebelling with the others. Scott Pilgrim vs. the World poster influenced the layout of my own poster, as it was one of the key influences throughout the editing of my film. The similarities can be seen at the top of the poster, with the split screens between the characters and the main character in the middle, once again isolated from everybody else. The four characters walking at the bottom of the poster was an influence from the cover of the Beatles album Abbey Road. This was more to show creativity than anything, however it is another typically British photograph which relates to the themes shown in my other products. I also created my film review on Fireworks after deciding to post it as if it was on an Enemy film blog on the website. I decided to go with Enemy because not only was their style of writing more suited to my target audience, but the relation to music on the blog was something that I felt would work well in the review of my film, as it contained a lot of similar music. When creating my web page, I looked closely at the website itself, making sure that everything was in the right place and that it was similar enough to the blog. The majority of the process was straightforward when creating the web page. However, the main problem came from the font that the NME website used. This took a lot of research in order to find the exact font, but it was worth it in the end. After a while, I found the font was Gothic Ultra, which was available for free download and use. However, like fontsfromdafont.com, I know that if it were a solely commercial product, I would have to gain permission from the creator to use the font. Once again, we were told to include our own original photography, and I decided to show this through my use of advertisements, as it is not typical of the NME website to include photographs from the film, excluding the poster. I was adamant to create as many advertisements as possible, as they majoritively take up the website page. I created these on Fireworks and made sure they were simple designs in order to save time. In the end, 4 were created. These included an advertisement about shoes, pens, headphones, and a technologically advanced phone. The film review itself had to be similar to those on the NME film blog. They are typically witty and in-depth about why a film has been created in such a way, and I made sure to make my film review similar. I did this through many attempts, but eventually understood how the films were meant to be portrayed in a review. As previously said, I intended for all 3 of my products to relate to each other, as it gives insight into the film for the audience. I feel as if my effort to do so was effective, and they are all of the same suitable nature with my use of colouring, style of writing and photography. What have you learned from your audience feedback? I decided to post my short film on the social networking site Facebook and the worldwide video website YouTube after I'd finished the first draft of my film. By posting on such websites, I managed to use Web 2.0 to my advantage by creating and uploading my own piece, whilst also using the internet as a form of influence when looking at other short films. After leaving my short film on Facebook for about a day, I had already received quite a few comments, all of which contained something I could improve on, which I found very helpful. The feedback told me that my plot and general idea was good, although it had been said to be slightly confusing at times. With this in mind, I had time to focus on other aspects of my film that the comments touched upon, such as the sound, which seemed to be the main problem. I am glad the sound issue had been brought to my attention, as at times I was so busy focusing on the editing that I did not realise my sound had been gradually losing its quality. Unfortunately, there was not much I could do to rectify the sound problem, as this was mostly down to the noise created by the camera itself, and therefore would only be able to change if I had filmed again using a better quality camera. However, due to the time constraints, this was not possible to do so. I had to see if there was anything on Final Cut Express that would improve the situation. I came across an item of software known as a hum remover, which after some research was said to be able to remove some of the background noise that arrives from the camera. Sadly, it did not make a huge difference, so I simply adjusted the volume of each individual clip to necessary height. This meant that I was able to really define the worst points of sound in the film and try to resolve them. I also thought it would be a helpful idea to perhaps ask around 10 to 20 people to fill out questionnaires specifically for my film in order to gain feedback and see where the weak and strong points are. Once again, due to the time issues, I had to ask friends and families to pass on the questionnaire as well as filling them out for themselves. This was because I wanted a wider and non-biased audience when getting feedback, as it gives a diverse group of people of all ages the chance to comment on what they liked and disliked about the short film. After perusing through the feedback, I discovered similar things that I found on the comments from Facebook, such as the sound. However, although it was not as detailed of a response at times with the questionnaire due to the fact that some of them may not have had the appropriate knowledge to go into an in-depth response, the difference in ages and tastes truly showed, as the older ages seemed to enjoy the music and style more than the younger ages, perhaps because it seemed more relatable to them. The camera work was also mentioned and said to be shaky at times. However, this is what I wanted in parts of my film, as it makes it seem much more realistic and also documentary-like. It's also a way to show how clouded and confused the main character Catherine's mind is, with the movement of the camera symbolising this as the audience is looking through her own eyes. Overall, the process of showing my film on the website taught me how important audience feedback is, because without it would be difficult to have an unbiased view as to what needs to be improved on. How did you use new media technologies in the construction and research, planning and evaluation stages? Throughout the process of creating and planning my short film, I felt it was important to experiment with new media technologies and also use those that I'm familiar with. When researching for my short film, I used the internet, as it contains a vast amount of information and other short films that were really helpful to observe when trying to think of a plot of my own film. Another important aspect to the research stage was blogging, which introduced me to many new technologies to be found on the internet. It was necessary to use such software as it makes a blog more appealing to see pictures, slideshows and so on, rather than just walls of writing. Prezi was the main piece of online software that I used, as it's free and I've used it previously. Prezi is an effective way to show work as it makes everything interactive, which is something else that appeals to the reader. I also use Spice Notes and MindMeister, which give their own interpretation of a mind map, and were very helpful in the planning stages as they help to put everything into perspective. This year we were introduced to a new editing program called Final Cut Express, which is widely known as being extremely effective when creating films. This interested me and caused me to use this product. However, as I've never used it before, learning how everything worked was slightly time consuming. As I was sceptical about how my film would turn out if produced solely on Final Cut Express, I decided to start editing on my film on iMovie. I felt I was actually unable to use iMovie by itself, as I had an exact idea of how I wanted to edit some shots, and this could not be achieved on iMovie, so my film had to be constructed in another program. LiveType was another new program which I had been introduced to in order to create titles and credits. Once again, learning how to use this took some time, but it was very easy to understand. Using LiveType over the usual title software gave me room to be more creative, as it had many more effects, fonts and movements that could be used. As I previously said, Fireworks was very useful in the construction stages of ancillary texts, and was very helpful as I had previously used the software. Apart from a few pieces of software and programs, I felt that I've effectively experimented with new technologies, and this has come across in my short film and my ancillary texts. When evaluating the processes I used, both my blog and iMovie, two things that I am also familiar with along with GarageBand, which I use to create every single piece of music on my film.